Summer 1943, Camp Crossville, Tennessee. The brown liquid fizzed inside the glass bottle, rising and popping like something alive. The German soldier turned it slowly in his hand, mesmerized. He had survived 2 years of desert war in North Africa on hard biscuits, thin soup, and bitter ersatz coffee. He had marched under the blazing sun with Rommel's Africa Corps, learned to ignore hunger, and been told relentlessly that America was weak, decadent, incapable of real sacrifice. Now, standing in an American prison camp canteen, he stared at a cold bottle of Coca-Cola that cost 5 cents. The same price, the guard casually told him, that American children paid with their weekly allowance. That moment, repeated hundreds of thousands of times across the United States in the summer of 1943, quietly dismantled an ideology. Across American prison camps that year, nearly 372,000 German prisoners of war encountered a reality that contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had taught them. They found a country where ice cream was a routine dessert, where soft drinks were everyday beverages, where candy bars were so common that guards handed them out without ceremony. These were not luxuries reserved for elites. They were ordinary, democratic pleasures. For many German soldiers, men whose childhoods had been shaped by depression, rationing, and war, this abundance was shocking. It wasn't simply comfort, it was proof. Proof that German deprivation was not noble sacrifice, but needless suffering. The mathematics of abundance were written not in slogans, but in sugar and carbonation, in chocolate and ice cream, in meals that arrived 3 times a day without exception. What began as amazement slowly became transformation. The process started months earlier in the desert. The surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia in May 1943 brought roughly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers into Allied captivity. These were hardened veterans who had driven the British back toward Egypt and expected brutal treatment in return. Nazi propaganda had prepared them for starvation and cruelty in American hands. Instead, within hours of surrender, they were issued American field rations. The irony was immediate. Rations American soldiers often complained about, K rations and C rations, were treated by German prisoners as feasts. Crackers, processed cheese, fruit bars, candy, cigarettes, instant coffee, sugar tablets, items that had disappeared from German military rations long before. At processing camps in North Africa, U.S. Army records show prisoners being served pancakes with syrup, fresh eggs, and milk. These foods had vanished from German mess halls years earlier. One German officer later testified to the International Red Cross, "We expected to be starved as prisoners. Instead, the Americans fed us better than our own army had. That confusion about American resources began our education." The education continued at sea. In the summer of 1943, Liberty ships carried German prisoners across the Atlantic at a scale that alone defied comprehension. These vessels, mass-produced at unprecedented speed, sometimes one completed every 42 hours, transported tens of thousands of prisoners each month. Naval records show prisoner rations aboard these ships matched or exceeded crew provisions, roughly 3,500 calories a day, including fresh bread, meat, vegetables, and coffee with sugar and milk. Refrigeration systems, standard on American ships, kept food fresh throughout the crossing. Then came the moment that became legend among former prisoners: ice cream. Ship logs confirm that on multiple Atlantic crossings, ice cream was served to prisoners. The USS General M.B. Stewart recorded serving ice cream on July 4, 1943, using the ship's onboard ice cream machine, capable of producing 10 gallons per batch. For men who had not seen ice cream since before the war, eating it in the middle of the ocean was incomprehensible. It wasn't just the taste, it was the implication. A country that could freeze cream for enemies while fighting a global war possessed a level of industrial power Nazi ideology had declared impossible. When the ships docked at ports like Norfolk and Newport News, the lessons continued. German prisoners saw ports larger than anything they had imagined. The Norfolk Naval Base alone covered over 4,000 acres and handled more cargo in a day than major German ports managed in a week. At dockside exchanges, prisoners glimpsed shelves stacked with candy bars from companies like Hershey, Mars, and Nestle. Military procurement records from 1943 showed dozens of varieties, sold for 5 cents each, the same price paid nationwide. The journey inland only reinforced the message. Instead of cattle cars, prisoners rode in passenger coaches. Dining cars served full meals. Menus from July 1943 list fried chicken, vegetables, pie, and coffee. This wasn't special treatment. Guards explained calmly that this was standard American rail service. The prison camps themselves exceeded expectations. Facilities like Camp Crossville in Tennessee had electric lights, hot water, flush toilets, heated barracks. But the real revelation came from the camp exchanges, the PX stores. Quartermaster records show shelves stacked with Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, candy bars, cigarettes, fresh fruit, snacks, and, where refrigeration allowed, ice cream. Prisoners earned about 80 cents a day for labor, later increased to $1. With Coca-Cola and candy bars priced at 5 cents, a single day's wages could buy more treats than most Germans had seen in years. Coca-Cola became the symbol of it all. Company records show 5 billion bottles were produced in 1943 alone. A military contract guaranteed a 5-cent Coke to American servicemen worldwide, a logistical commitment of staggering scale. German prisoners discovered the drink everywhere. Camps, factories, gas stations, schools. Americans drank it casually, sometimes leaving bottles half-finished. The consistency amazed technically minded prisoners. A Coke tasted the same in Tennessee as it did in Texas or Maine. Syrup concentrate produced in Atlanta was shipped nationwide to bottling plants, an example of industrial coordination that shattered Nazi assumptions about American disorder.
Ice cream delivered an even deeper shock. Army records confirmed it was regularly served in camps with adequate refrigeration. The U.S. military considered ice cream essential for morale, so important that specialized ice cream ships were later built for the Pacific Fleet. At Camp Shelby, Mississippi, the July 4, 1943 celebration included ice cream made on site. Prisoners watched as hand-cranked freezers produced gallons using ice, salt, cream, and sugar. The casual use of such scarce resources in wartime left them stunned. By 1944, many camps had electric ice cream makers. Chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, butter pecan, more variety than most German ice cream parlors had offered before the war. Sugar told the same story. In Germany, sugar was strictly rationed, about 280 grams per month when available. In American camps, sugar sat in bowls on mess hall tables for unrestricted use. Quartermaster records show camps receiving 100-pound bags weekly. Cakes, cookies, and pies appeared regularly. Coffee and cereal were sweetened without thought. At Camp Aliceville, Alabama, kitchen staff once discarded several 100 pounds of sugar that had hardened in humidity, ordering replacements rather than attempting recovery. German prisoners working there were reportedly distressed by the waste. To Americans, it was routine. Chocolate reinforced the lesson. Major companies produced millions of bars monthly throughout the war. The U.S. military alone purchased roughly 380 million pounds of chocolate products. Camp exchanges stocked multiple varieties. Prisoners learned Americans debated brands, choosing favorites casually. Red Cross parcels delivered monthly included chocolate bars alongside coffee, cheese, crackers, canned meat, cigarettes, and soap, luxuries exceeding what German civilians received as basic rations. Holidays drove the message home. Thanksgiving 1943 saw every camp serve traditional meals: roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes and gravy, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, vegetables, pumpkin pie, coffee, and milk. German prisoners ate the same meal as American soldiers. Christmas brought civilian generosity. Church groups and civic organizations sent thousands of packages filled with cookies, candy, toiletries, games, and books. In towns near camps, civilians delivered homemade treats to enemy prisoners. This kindness contradicted Nazi ideology more powerfully than any lecture ever could. As labor shortages grew, prisoners worked outside camps and witnessed American abundance firsthand. By 1944, about 100,000 worked in agriculture and food processing. In Michigan orchards, they picked cherries destined not for survival, but for maraschino garnishes on ice cream sundaes. In canneries, they watched edible food rejected for minor blemishes. Sugar beet farms produced yields dwarfing entire German regions. They learned that American sugar production reached roughly 7 million tons annually. The mystery of abundance suddenly had an explanation. They saw it in schools, too. Children received hot lunches with milk, protein, and vegetables. Some cafeterias sold ice cream. The idea that children could buy frozen desserts at school while German children faced hunger was devastating. At roadside diners, minimum security prisoners saw factory workers and businessmen eating the same meals at the same prices. Hamburgers, pie, Coca-Cola, available to anyone. By late 1944, the reversal was complete. German prisoners were sending food packages home. Using camp wages, they mailed chocolate, coffee, and canned goods to families in Germany. Red Cross records confirm millions of such parcels. German civilians received American abundance from imprisoned relatives while starving in freedom. The ideological impact was irreversible. When the war ended, many prisoners returned healthier than when captured. They brought stories and sometimes chocolate back to a shattered country. Former prisoners became advocates of the Marshall Plan because they had seen American abundance firsthand. They understood that American power came from production, not conquest. These lessons shaped West Germany's recovery. Supermarkets, soda fountains, mass-produced consumer goods, all were familiar concepts learned in captivity. One former Africa Corps officer later said, "We expected to defeat a weak America. Instead, we found a nation that could give ice cream to enemies. That's when we knew we had lost more than a war." Another recalled, "My first Coca-Cola was like drinking the future. Sweet, unnecessary, and available to anyone for a nickel." Historians, including Arnold Cromer, have concluded that food abundance was central to the ideological transformation of German prisoners in America. Casual plenty accomplished what formal re-education programs could not. These men didn't just hear about democracy, they tasted it. In the end, bottles of Coca-Cola and dishes of ice cream achieved something extraordinary. They transformed enemies without force. They proved that a society wealthy enough to share abundance, even with those who fought against it, possessed a strength beyond weapons. Democracy's ultimate weapon was not fear, but generosity. And for hundreds of thousands of German prisoners of war, that lesson arrived cold, sweet, and fizzing on a hot American summer day.